Today I want to share my birth story with you. I loved watching birth stories before giving birth because I feel like there really is nothing that can truly prepare you for your delivery, but it is good to kind of have an idea of what can happen, what goes on in the delivery room, and it's just interesting to listen to other people's stories because every labor and delivery is different. At least I haven't come across two labor and delivery stories that are the same because everyone's body is unique, everyone's baby is unique, everybody's health care is different as well, and the team that serves them is different. So let's just jump right on in. So I chose midwives for my prenatal care because I live in Ontario, and so you have the choice of either going with an OB or with midwives, and both are covered by OHIP. There's no extra charge for going with midwives. And for me, I just felt like midwives were the better choice because I wanted kind of more personalized care. I wanted really good postnatal care as well, because when you have an OB, I'm pretty sure you're only seen at 6 weeks postpartum, whereas with a midwife, they come to your house 2 days after birth and then another 2 days after that. They come multiple times, and you can call them at any time because there's always a midwife on call, and you have their pager number, so if there's an emergency or if you have a really important question that you need to ask, you can always ask them. My pregnancy was very textbook, very typical. I had no complications. I passed my glucose test despite having PCOS. I didn't have any hypertension or preeclampsia or anything like that. Everything was good. The only thing was that I was measuring a couple weeks behind according to my fundal height, but then they did an ultrasound and it seemed like the baby was an okay size, so they didn't take any action on that. So everything was okay. About a month before I gave birth, so around like 34, 35 weeks, I started having Braxton Hicks contractions. So it was just like a tightening of the uterus. It was very infrequent and it wasn't painful. And I think that's fairly typical to have Braxton Hicks contractions before labor. But then about 2 weeks before I gave birth, I started having prodromal labor. So around like 36, 37 weeks, I started having actual painful contractions that I could time. And they were about 5 to 7 minutes apart. And this would happen once. It happened about 3 or 4 times at night where I would wake up and I would feel like I was going into labor because I'd have painful contractions that were 5 to 7 minutes apart, and they would last for a couple hours, and I'd be like, okay, this is it, I'm going into labor. And then they'd stop, and I wouldn't have them again for sometimes days. And a lot of the times with prodromal labor, it is because your baby is in an unfavorable position. So for a while, my baby was breech. My baby was breech up until 36 weeks when he flipped. But when he flipped, he didn't flip in the entirely correct position. He was actually posterior, so that means he was sunny side up. He was facing up when babies should be facing down when they come out. So I think part of that prodromal labor was my body trying to get him to turn around and come out the right way. But the appointment right before I went into labor, so my 39-week appointment, my midwife did say that she believed that my baby was posterior and was not facing the correct way, but they can't be 100% certain. This is all just from palpation, so they palpate your stomach and they try to find out what position the baby's in and whether or not that position is favorable for birth. And so I knew that my baby was probably not in the correct position. And I tried to fix that. I did all the spinning baby stuff where you kind of just like get into weird positions, a lot of inversions where you basically put yourself upside down to try to encourage them to flip around to the right position. It's good for breech babies, good for posterior babies, but for me, it was not successful. So when I did go into labor, he was not quite in the correct position, and we knew that. So I went into labor on October 18th. I woke up at 5 a.m. that morning with contractions, and I started timing them because they were painful and they were regular. They were 5 to 7 minutes apart at the beginning, starting at 5 a.m. But they weren't like so painful that I couldn't talk through them. So I woke up, couldn't go back to sleep. I tried to go back to sleep because the one thing that my midwives told me was that if you think you're in early labor, just try to sleep. Like, take some Tylenol, go to bed, try to sleep, because labor can be very long, especially if you're a first-time mom. And I knew this, so I was really trying hard to sleep. But the hard thing about at least my labor was the contractions weren't painful enough that like I was having to stop and not breathe through them and not talk, but I also couldn't sleep through them. They would wake me up. Like, I woke up from the contraction. And at this point I just felt like really bad period cramps, but I couldn't sleep through them. So I woke up, I had a shower, my boyfriend went to work. They ended up sending him back because he was like, I think my girlfriend's in labor, and they were like, okay, we'll go be with her then. So he ended up coming back, and I kind of like labored all morning. The contractions got closer together, so they were coming every 3 to 4 minutes, which was when my midwives had said to call them. If my contractions were about 3 to 5 minutes apart for an hour, lasting more than a minute, I was supposed to call them. And so I called them up at around 11 a.m. because my contractions had been very regular since about 5 a.m. and were just getting closer together. And my primary midwife came to check me. And okay, the experience of getting checked was so traumatic for me. I don't know why, but it was so painful. My entire pregnancy, literally any sort of vaginal penetration was, well, not my entire pregnancy, from about second trimester onwards, vaginal penetration was just so uncomfortable. I don't know why. I think everything down there just gets so swollen. Like, I couldn't even recognize my vagina by the time that I gave birth because I was so swollen down there from all the pressure. And so I think that's why it was just so painful. So every time she checked me, it was just like, so terrible. But I was only 1 centimeter dilated at 11 a.m. and I think I was 50% effaced. And so she was like, this is early labor, try to sleep, take some Tylenol, take some Gravel, try to sleep. And so I was like, okay. And as soon as she left, the contractions started getting, again, more painful. I think the cervical exam actually just got things going even worse. And so my boyfriend and I, we went to try to get some food and eat. I think we got like one of those, Harvey's got this new like Light Life plant-based burger, and so I got that and some onion rings, and we tried to just like kind of wait it out. I think we watched Spider-Man in the living room, tried to chill out, and the contractions were like really strong. I was starting to have to stop and like breathe through them and like hold on to something while I was having them. But then around like mid-afternoon, they started to kind of just like taper off a little bit. So I'm still having them, but they weren't as painful or as consistent. So they kind of lengthened out from being 3 minutes apart to being more like 6, 7, 8 minutes apart. And so I was like, oh my God, my labor has stalled. Maybe it's not even real labor. And so I tried to nap. Again, could not nap because even though the contractions were not incredibly strong anymore, they were still strong enough that I couldn't sleep through them. So around 5 or 6 p.m., the contractions picked up again. So I was walking around, I was squatting, I was bouncing on a birthing ball, which I had actually made my boyfriend go out and get that morning. Contractions kept getting stronger. My sister came over, my best friend Hannah came over, her boyfriend Alex. And at this point, the contractions were continuing to get stronger, and I was starting to have to breathe through them and stop. And they were getting like pretty painful, but they were still like 4 to 5 minutes apart. They were not getting any closer. And so my midwife called around 8 to ask how I was doing. I let my midwife know that I felt like things were picking up, but my contractions still weren't 2 minutes apart, which were what she wanted them to be when I called her next. And they still weren't lasting for more than a minute. They were somewhere around 60 seconds in length, but no more than that. So at this point, I got in the bathtub, I tried to relax, but things were just getting super, super intense. We watched Blades of Glory. My boyfriend started making apple crisp and chili, stress cooking. It was a very exciting point in the labor because things were like picking up, but it was starting to get very, very painful, which was obviously not fun. Like, the best way that I can describe a contraction is a horrible, terrible period cramp. And for me, especially because the baby was posterior, the contractions, the pain radiated through my back. It helped a bit to have some counter pressure on my back, as well as down my legs, like literally all the way down my legs, which is crazy to me. Like, it was almost a full body pain at this point, and I was so uncomfortable, but I still hadn't lost my mucus plug or anything like that. So the contractions continued to get stronger. We tried to like chill out. I tried to eat something. I think I had like a bowl of cornflakes around like 8 p.m. or tried to eat a bowl of cornflakes, because at this point I hadn't eaten since like noon. And I knew that if this was going to be going on all night, which it looked like it was going to, that I probably needed a little bit of sustenance. But at this point I also felt nauseous, which was another hint to me that things were moving along. And so around 11 p.m. I called the midwife again, and I let her know that I thought that things were progressed now and that I was probably in full-blown active labor. And so she came to check me, and I was 3 to 4 centimeters dilated at that point and 100% effaced. But it had taken me like 18 hours to get there. 18 hours of like pretty intense labor, where for the majority of that time my contractions were coming every 3 to 5 minutes, with like a break of like 2 hours in the afternoon where things slowed down a little bit only to pick up again. So like I was pretty exhausted at this point. I was already pretty spent. So the midwife, it was nice, she kind of just hung out here because our plan had been to stay home for as long as I possibly could stay home, because the sooner you go to the hospital, the more likely you are to get more interventions than you need, and for them to get impatient with your labor taking so long. And I knew the best thing for me was to stay home for as long as possible. It was nice, the midwife sat on the couch over there. I mainly hung out on this chair over here, or standing behind this chair, grabbing it and moaning. And I was trying my best to breathe through the contractions and relax, because that's what you're supposed to do when you're having a contraction. But I had such a hard time. I was tensing up so much, because at least for me, when I expect pain, I tense up. So as soon as I could feel a contraction coming on, I would just automatically tense up, and I couldn't seem to relax even in between the contractions. Like, there was almost, they were relentless at that point, where even when one contraction ended, I wasn't able to relax, and everything was just in so much pain. Like, it was so painful that like my brain hurt. Like, every time I would get a contraction, my brain hurt. That's how painful it was. I can't even describe it. Again, it's like an indescribable amount of pain. Not to scare you, but I'm also not great with pain, so I'm a bit of a wimp, if you can't tell. So around this time, after the midwife checked me and said I was 3 to 4 centimeters dilated, I did begin to lose my mucus plug. And so again, another sign that things were progressing. We continued to labor at home. At this point, I was wanting pain relief of some sort. I had been up for almost 24 hours. It was like 3 a.m. and I just wanted some relief. So my midwife checked me again. I was 6 centimeters, and we decided, okay, let's go to the hospital now. So we finally got to the hospital. I get very stressed in hospitals. I've never had any sort of surgery. I've never stayed overnight in a hospital. Like, my experience with hospitals is very minimal, but being in a hospital for some reason just makes me anxious. So As soon as we entered the hospital, my anxiety kind of like shot up through the roof. But we got to the room, I got into the gown. My midwife had to do all this different paperwork and kind of get everything set up, because as soon as you're in a hospital, you have to follow a lot more rules and protocols than when you're at home. And my midwife at that point was still in charge of my labor, because now in Ontario, if midwives are trained to, they can administer epidurals. So I ended up getting the epidural, which honestly was not bad at all. Out of everything that happened during my labor, I was really, really anxious for it, but it didn't really hurt, and it wasn't that hard to stay still. I was really concerned about staying still while I got the epidural, because it's tricky when someone's poking your spine. You don't want to get paralyzed, but it was not a big deal at all, the epidural. I got an IV because that's necessary if you get an epidural, and a catheter, which was again one of the most like scary experiences for me, was the catheter. I don't know why I was so scared of the catheter, but I was very scared of it because I'd never had a catheter before. And so after I got the epidural, they checked me again, and they also broke my water. So I was still a 6. They broke my water, and this is where things started to get a little bit wonky. At this point, it's like 5 a.m. on the 19th. And things started to get a little bit crazy. So at this point I wasn't really progressing anymore, and my contractions had kind of slowed down. To begin with, my contractions were kind of weird. I would get one big contraction, followed by a smaller contraction 1 to 2 minutes later, and then there'd be a 4 to 5 minute break, and I'd get another big one followed by another small one, which is apparently pretty normal for a baby that's presenting as posterior. So at this point the baby was still posterior. So I still wasn't progressing. They had the gynecologist on duty come in. She checked me as well. She said the baby was now sideways instead of facing up, which is like he was starting to turn, which was great because I didn't want them to have to manually turn him. That sounded terrible. And then at this point, they decided it would be best to administer Pitocin, but at the same time that they were making this decision to administer Pitocin to me to speed up the labor a little bit, the baby's heart rate began to have early decels, is what they're called. So they're not like full-on decelerations, but during contractions, his heart rate would drop and then go back up. It was really scary because they'd be like flipping me over onto my side to see if that position was better for the baby, and like I could hear his heartbeat dropping, and I was just freaking out. They put an oxygen mask on me. They were starting to talk about the potential need to have a C-section, which again terrified me. So at this point I was super stressed out. I was stressed out about the health of my baby. I was stressed out about having a C-section. I was just, in general, I was freaking out, like, freaking out. It was not fun. But his heart rate stabilized, and we figured out that it was because he was in the process of turning and was probably just getting squeezed a little bit, which was putting stress on his heart, obviously. Because the next time they checked me, he had turned all the way around and was in the correct position. So at this point they administered Pitocin to me. I had the epidural. The epidural was great in that I couldn't feel the pain, but I could 100% feel the pressure. There was so much pressure. And I just, yeah, it was a lot of pressure. And I remember I still had to like hold on to something during contractions and breathe because there was so much pressure every time I got a contraction that it was like overwhelming. Not painful, but still I had to brace myself for it. And so I just kind of laid there and chatted with the nurses, chatted with my sister and my mom, my boyfriend. We called my dad, we talked to him. It was a really chill time, and I'm actually really, really glad that I got the epidural because it allowed me to kind of relax. And honestly, they did not check me again Probably the last time they checked me was like, probably I'd say like 8 a.m. maybe. And they didn't check me again until 11. Around 10, I really started getting the urge to push and like feeling like his head was like right there. And I did tell the nurse that. I guess I didn't think that I had progressed very much because of how weird my contractions were, how I was still having two very close together and then another, and then a big space. By the time they checked me, I was complete, I was fully dilated, and I was basically ready to push. So we started pushing at, I believe it was 12. And it took me an hour and a half of pushing to get him out. Pushing was again a very interesting experience. It literally just felt like taking a poop. I did end up pooping, which I don't know, like to me at the time it didn't faze me. I know a lot of people worry about pooping in the delivery room, but it's not really that big of a deal. Like there's so much else going on that you really don't care. You just want that baby out at that point. And yeah, I didn't mind the experience of pushing. It wasn't painful until the very final push where he came out. But right when his head was about to come out, they actually stopped me from pushing and held his head in because the OB was not yet present. Which I did not like that, okay? Was not fond of that, because when you, ladies that have had a baby, when you have to push, you have to push. And when a baby's coming out of you, the last thing you want is someone trying to keep that baby in you. And that's probably where I felt the most pain, because I was trying to push a baby head out and they were like, wait. And then when his head did finally come out, he just literally shot out of me. I did end up with a 2nd-degree tear, so they stitched me up. And yeah, they put him on my chest. It was so surreal. It literally felt like a dream to me. I felt like I was floating. I was also very, very dizzy, so I had to hand the baby to my boyfriend so that he could have some skin-to-skin time with him, because I felt like I was going to pass the fuck out. At that point, I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. He was born at 1:24. The last time I had eaten was like noon the last day, the day before. And I hadn't slept since 5 a.m. on the 18th, and again it was now 1:30 on the 19th, so I was just totally out of it. And so once I felt better and had eaten a little bit, we did try to breastfeed a bit, but Percy started to have some breathing difficulties, and so they had to take him to the NICU, where they discovered he also had a low-grade fever. So then they put him on prophylactic antibiotics, and he had to stay in the NICU for 2 days, which was really hard, because for those of you who have had a baby, you know that when you've been pregnant for 9 months and that baby suddenly is not inside of you anymore, there's like a big feeling of loss, and you just want to hold that baby. And so when you're not able to hold that baby because they're attached to all these wires in the NICU, it's so stressful and heartbreaking, and I had some good cries during that time. But yeah, overall I am happy with my labor and delivery. I have a healthy baby boy. I managed to somehow avoid having a C-section. I was convinced I was going to end up with a C-section when his heart rate was dropping. And what I did want was a vaginal delivery, so that happened for me, which was great. And I felt for the most part in control, and my midwives were great with helping to calm me down and keep me focused. And I'm grateful for having such an awesome team looking after me. They were so on top of things, and they immediately noticed when he was in distress and when he had breathing difficulties and the fever and everything, so that was awesome. And I'm glad that they were cautious and that they took action immediately, because that can save a baby's life. So yeah, it was overall a good experience. Please let me know in the comments below like how your labor or delivery went. I love hearing different birth stories, because it's just like everyone's is so different, but they're all so beautiful. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I'm sorry that it was so long. If you would like to hear more from me, you can follow me on Instagram. I post lots of pictures of Percy. My username is very generic. And please let me know what videos you'd like to see in the future. Thank you for watching. Bye.